Hello, we are the NAACP Youth Council, and this is our portion of the Youth Tell the Truth about Racism in Schools. And now I will pass it on to Alexis.
Hi, my name is Alexis Burr. I'm a rising junior at Foster High School in Sequoia and obviously a member of the NAACP Youth Council. Thank you so much for joining us. We want to start off by grounding ourselves in a land acknowledgement. So if we could please go to the next slide. We want to acknowledge that all of us are on land that non-Indigenous folks have stolen and that Indigenous folks have been in since time immemorial. And in the greater Seattle area, and where our group is located, we occupy the Suquamish, Duwamish, and Stillaguamish and Coast Salish lands. Obviously, we're not all in the same place. So if we go to the next slide, please. We want to encourage you all to find out what native land you're occupying, and you can do so at nativeland.ca, and then you can put in your city or zip code, and that will give you they'll give you information about what native tribes have occupied your land. And then to take the step further, if you go to the next slide, I think it's actually the next two slides, for some reason it was duplicated. We are on Duwamish land, and to further our actions in doing more than just acknowledging land, there is an organization called Real Rent Duwamish, which is where you can pay rent for the Duwamish people. And we say this because it's important to go beyond just acknowledgement and actually into action. This is to repay stolen settler capital to Indigenous folks and to help them achieve liberation and sovereignty. If you go to their website, there's also petitions there's also petitions where you can sign in support of them getting federal recognition. So yeah, we really appreciate if you would do that work to both acknowledge and do action to honor Native people in the land that they have occupied before us. Next slide, please.
So we are the NAACP Youth Council, like I have said before. So now we're going to start off with introductions. I will start. My name is Dabney. I'm going to be a senior at Cleveland High School this school year, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'll pass it on to Alexis.
I can already introduce myself. Alexis, she, her pronouns. I'm going to be a junior. I'll pass it to Hibbah.
Hi, my name is Hibbah. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be a senior this year at Mburu High School. And I'll pass it on to Maddie.
I'm Maddie. I'm going to be a junior at Lincoln High School in Seattle, and I'm going to pass it. Oh, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'll pass it to John, I guess.
Hey everybody, my name is John Greenberg. I am working in the shadows to support the group, but I'm one of the youth coordinators for the Washington NAACP Youth Council, and I'll put my email in the chat in case anybody wants to ever reach out to connect more with the group. He, him.
Perfect. Thank you, John. So can we go to the next slide, please? So before we get into a backstory of or a little history recap of the NAACP Youth Council, we'll start off with norms we'd like to follow. So the first one is accept discomfort as necessary part of growth. Next slide, please. Then stay open to the experiences of others. Next slide. Thank you. So now these are just some images of NYC and the work we have been doing over the past couple of years. So we are a youth group, Seattle based, but we have expanded all over Washington. We have students from Edmonds to Tukwila to Rainier Beach, all over. And this is some of us at the MLK March. This is some of us in Spokane. And that just a bunch of pictures of us doing amazing work. Next slide, please. Then here are some articles that have been written about us and the work we have done. Next slide. Thank you. And here's another one of the amazing Rena and CC. Next slide. So we do a lot of work with the Emerald. And then here is one of us at, this is one of our first online meetings, of course. Next slide. And then here are some more pictures of us when we went to DC just I think just about a month ago, actually, and us visiting museums and the White House and a bunch of other locations where we just learned the history of the people who are here and the people who built this country and beyond. Next slide. And then here are the people who helped us get the grant so we can have funding. And so students in the NAACP Youth Council are able to get paid. So this is Rita Green at the top, and then down below is Sabrina Burr, and they were some of the amazing women who were able to give us the grant, so we are able to get paid for the work that we do. Next slide. And now we're going to go over some of the demands that we are fighting for currently this year. Next slide. Thank you. So the first demand is increased youth voice, especially BIPOC youth in decision-making at all levels of public education. So with our demands, we also have subcommittees where we do work based on demand to get change made with it. So for example, one of the things that we are currently doing with this demand is implementing policy 1250. And John, if you have access to it, if you're able to put the demand in the chat, that would be great so people have access to that. But currently with this demand, we are trying to get youth on the school board so they have power to make decisions about things that are happening with our education. It's such an important thing just so that we have power over our education, and we want to make those changes within it. So being able to get youth on the school board will just increase the way students learn and love to grow as human beings. So that is one of the things we do, and I will pass it on to the next person. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so our next demand is mandate thorough and frequent staff racial equity trainings. Like we mentioned earlier, our group was originally founded in Seattle, but we've expanded all over Washington. So all these demands, they might be being like worked on in one district or another city, but our goal is to have these be spread all over the state. Now for racial equity trainings, this couples with other demands that we have, like retaining BIPOC teachers, which we'll get to, but in summary, we are living in a time where it's not enough to be not racist. As we've all heard, we need to be anti-racist, and we need to have teachers and staff in our schools who are dedicated to making sure that our school systems and our classrooms are equitable. Now, equity doesn't come easy. You have to know what you're fighting for. You have to know how to work with students and other teachers. You have to know how to work with people of color, and you can't get anywhere in this progression of anti-racism without being trained. And that's something that a lot of schools struggle with, is that they say like, yeah, we want to be more equitable, we want to have, you know, better diversity, whatever you want to say, but they're not actually doing the work to make sure that it's possible. They're not putting their staff in professional developments where they talk about things that we need to talk about. They're not putting their money where their mouth is, really. And that's why we need thorough and frequent staff training, so that we are all on the same page and that we can all get to where we want to get to faster with training that is necessary. Next slide, please.
Our next demand is increased access to opportunities and mental health services and financial literacy. So what that pretty much means is students are currently not being supported mentally, emotionally, physically, or at all, just in general, when it comes to being in school. We're at school 24/7, like September to June, and we are not being supported in the way we need. Our counselors are not given the resources to support us when it comes to taking care of ourselves or learning how to pay taxes, or simple things just that humans need to do to be able to provide for themselves and take care of themselves to be able to operate. So that means we need to be funding more counselors. We need to fund people that look like us. We need to see people who look and act like us and have had experiences like the students to be able to make it a better education system in general. Next slide, please.
So our next demand is to abolish the HCC program in Seattle Public Schools. And for those who don't know, the HCC program is kind of like the advanced learning program that Seattle Public Schools has to offer that requires like standardized testing to get into. So like a little background about the program, it was established in the 1970s when SPS started a mandatory busing for integration program that pretty much led a lot of white families to leave the district because they didn't want their kids going to school with Black and brown students. The HCC program was created to bring these white families back into the district and offer their children segregated advanced learning that Black and brown families were not offered. The testing is biased to whiteness in the methods used, and parents with privilege can appeal for their students using paid private testing that really just highlights the inequities in the system. We believe that it needs to be abolished and not reformed in any way, because no like advanced learning or anything like that really can cater to all students, and all students really deserve high quality, anti-racist, transformative education that just recognizes the individuality of every student and the brilliance of every student, and HCC program will never offer that. And if you go to the next slide, please. And our next demand is mandate climate change education, emphasizing environmental racism and dramatically decrease the carbon footprint of public education. So, we all know climate change is real. We can't continue to ignore it. And the effects of these changes are heavily felt by BIPOC communities. We must educate all students about environmental racism and provide a deeper understanding of global warming, climate change, and commit students to environmental education. So for this demand, we're specifically asking that environmental literacy and racism be taught, making the education engaging. It can be really difficult to engage students in these topics, but it really has to be done if SBS and like any school district is going to commit to anti-racist education, and it has to be taught for generations to follow. And finally, being energy efficient and less wasteful and committing to 100% clean energy. And this is just as simple as using LED lights or pushing for cafeterias and schools to consume less dairy and meat products. And next slide, please.
This next demand support Black Lives Matter at School actions, including the New Year of Purpose. So Black Lives Matter at School is an initiative that was started in Seattle Public Schools, and I'm sure many of you might have heard of it, or likely have heard of it. It's spread nationally, and Black Lives Matter at School is an initiative that is its goal is to make sure that we are celebrating Black lives in school, that the movement that we've seen on the news and in the last 6-7 years isn't just a trend, isn't just something that we see every few years when it comes up after tragedy. It's something that we need to be teaching students. It's something that we need to be living. And Black Lives Matter is something that something that isn't just a trend. It's more than that. It's principles. It's a lot of other things. And so it was started in Seattle, and there was a lot of push to get it, expanded, and a lot of people supported that. And so now one of our demands is to support Black Lives Matter because of the amazing impact that it's had, and as well as the New Year of Purpose, which is to make sure that we're not just celebrating Black Lives Matter once in a year, 1 week, 1 month. It's all year. So every month in a year, there are different principles from Black Lives Matter at School that are celebrated. And Black Lives Matter at School has their own list of demands that really overlap with ours. So these next demands that you're going to see are going to have arrows that kind of show the overlap between their demands and ours. So if we could have the next slide, please. This is a picture of our group in other protests, school board meetings supporting Black Lives Matter. And is it possible if our slideshow can be refreshed? I think there's been a last minute change. That's good. You can just press share now. Next slide, please. So these are some of the months from the Year of Purpose. So some of them would be International Peoples with Disabilities Day, Queer Organizing, Unapologetically Black. Those are just some of the themes that would be going on throughout the year. If we can go to the next slide, I think the next slide should be a demand. It should be add ethnicity, so it's a few slides away. There we go.
There we go. So the next demand is incorporate restorative justice practices in police-free schools instead of problematic, outdated discipline practices. So that pretty much means stop policing the students. There are police officers in some schools, and it leads to very unsafe and just not comforting environments for students where they're unable to learn. I currently go to Cleveland High School, where we have actual adults who lead restorative justice practices. So that is where we do problem solving work, where if you have an issue with someone, you're able to talk to them, and also have two leaders who have the conversation with you to figure out the issue and pretty much restore the feeling, or just restore that dynamic between you. And you can have that with students, teachers, adults, parents, families, anyone's able to have them together, and they're here just to support just the community at the school. And we need to have restorative justice teachers and leaders to be trained, but also throughout the district and beyond, so that students are learning how to communicate in a way that is not just respectful, but teaches them how to restore that justice in dynamics they have with people. So that is why we have incorporate restorative justice practices as one of the week of action demands. Next slide, please. And then next, Alexis, did you want to go first, or should I? Okay, so next up we have mandate ethnic studies, pre-K to 12th, and fully staffed ethnic studies departments in every district. This was kind of already talked about before, but of course we need to have educators who not just understand the experiences of students, but can respect them and teach them, because you learn better from people who look like you and have had experiences like you. And even if that does not happen with teachers, it's good to have staff and educators who understand and are educated on the experiences of youth, because you learn better when people just have an overall understanding of what that looks like. So ethnic studies needs to be mandated fully in K through 12, because it benefits so many people, and not just through your education, but beyond that. Next slide, please.
So hire and retain more BIPOC educators, BIPOC being Black, Indigenous people of color. Like me, I had kind of hinted at before, students obviously are able to share experiences and be able to connect with people that look like them. But there's often this misconception that, you know, if you have Black teachers or brown teachers, Latinx teachers, that, you know, only benefit the Black students or the Latinx students, but that's not true. There's a lot of studies and data that shows that when you have a diverse working force, or teaching force rather, it benefits all students. And when we say benefits, that means that there's more engagement with families, with students, better test scores, even graduation rates. And so when we say we need to hire more BIPOC teachers, that means, yeah, we need to hire them. We need to be better at recruiting teachers of color to be in the classrooms, but also changing the cultures in the school to make sure that they're retained. And obviously we live in Washington, and in Washington, I forget the stat all the time, but it's something like in the 80s or 90s of our teaching force is white, whereas the schools that they're actually teaching in, that doesn't represent the student population at all. And we need not only teachers that represent us, but like we talked about with ethnic studies demand, we need curriculum that represents us. We need textbooks that tell true stories. We need just more culturally and community responsive environment so that our students can thrive. Whereas when we don't have that, and we are just going by the status quo that is, you know, heteronormative and Eurocentric, that honestly sets a lot of students up for failure. Next slide, or Mia, did you want to speak?
No, next slide is great. And then this next one is fund counselors, not cops. So that means, of course, we need to increase the amount of counselors we have at schools in general, because most schools have about 2 or less counselors working, and they're not able to support every single student in schools, just because it's so low and there's so many students. With the ratio of like 2 to like 900 students, it's just not possible to be able to support all of them in the ways they need to when it comes to college and beyond work, when it comes to supporting them emotionally, supporting them in the class and out of the class. So we want that money, instead of going to the cops, going to hire more counselors and people who can help the students. Next slide, please. Next up, we have add ethnic studies to the strategic plan. So that pretty much just means we want ethnic studies. It's continuing. It's been said so many times throughout this presentation just because of how important ethnic studies is to the education of youth, because when you start so young, there's so many more, the success rate of a person just ups. So we'd like that to be added to the strategic plan. Next slide, please.
This is a demand that was actually Seattle's public schools specific. Renovate Rainier Beach High School in an occupied renovation to be completed before 2025. Rainier Beach is the last Seattle high school that has had any renovation, and there's been a lot of push for the past like almost 8 years to have this predominantly Black high school be renovated and not to have the students in the school be pushed out. We want it to be an occupied renovation because we don't want any displacement. Yeah, we'll move on past these Seattle specific ones. Next slide, please.
Hibbah, would you like to do the slide?
Sure. So one of our demands was to fire Superintendent Juneau of SPS schools, as she just wasn't listening to the demands of the students, and said that she was gonna bring about change, but really didn't. And there was a lot of action taken against her by our group, and eventually, I think this year she resigned. So this is one of the things, this is one of the demands that we were able to like carry out and bring about a change. Next slide.
Yeah, so this was the get out the vote, like almost campaign. So it kind of originally started with the election or the presidential election in 2020. And this demand was just kind of like to encourage people to vote with the help of Molly Moon's, which is a local ice cream shop in Seattle. So like with this campaign, those who registered, they would vote, and then they would encourage 5 other friends to vote, and then those 5 friends would encourage another 5, and so on. But we also worked really closely with other public officer candidates, such as Nikita Oliver, who is running for city council in Seattle, and other SPS school board candidates. Even though we were unable to really publicly endorse any of these candidates, we still chose to work alongside others who we thought would help us achieve and progress our goals. Next slide, please. So after hearing like all of these demands, I guess you can give like a minute or two to think, but which of these demands resonated with you and why? And I guess you can put your answers like in the chat. Actually, instead of in the chat, if you could just unmute and answer the first question.
I see a few hands raised, so I'll start with Anna. Go ahead, Anna.
So first of all, thank you for doing this great work and allowing us to have this space with you. With regards to the first question, when you were talking about removals of SROs and the implementation of more counselors, really struck a chord because in our school district that I am in, there's a small group of parents who are actively trying to remove SROs, and we are actually, and the superintendent out here is also in going into meetings and talking about what the equity work is going to be looking like in the schools in the coming school year. Do you want me to answer all three questions?
No, you're fine. Thank you so much for your answer. We're gonna get to those next. I see that there's some things in the chat that I'll share out loud. One demand that resonated with me is to put more money into resources for students, such as counseling rather than policing. We just heard a presentation about poor education outcomes resulting in incarceration. I love that connection that you just made because we will be talking about that in just a little while. Someone said counselors, not cops, resonated. We just made changes to stop policing students in the other SPS, Spokane Public Schools, but I appreciate it. It's all important. Thank you for that. Mandate ethnic studies, hire more Black teachers, and abolish police presence in schools. Yeah, absolutely. So we really appreciate your responses, and obviously none of these things exist in a vacuum. We didn't just kind of come up with these demands on a whim. It's because of lived experience. It's because we have seen, or we have siblings who've seen, or adults, mentors, parents who've seen or experienced the inequities in our education system. And, you know, we really want to put names to these things that a lot of people in the past, or, you know, people that we look up to didn't necessarily have the option to do. And so some people might look at these demands as being, you know, harsh or abrasive or whatever, like, oh, fire the superintendent. But honestly, that's nothing compared to the harm and violence that is done when these things, these systems are perpetuated and not called out. And everything is really connected, everything overlaps, nothing is kind of a silo in its own realm, everything kind of goes together. And so I mentioned lived experience, and I think that's a good segue to the next question. I was in a group one time, and the intro question was, what is your relationship to school? And it seems simple, but that meeting was supposed to be an hour, and that intro alone took the entire meeting, and it was really powerful. And so I and the rest of our group is curious, like, what was your relationship in school when you were, you know, in it? Or maybe you have children who are in school, siblings, whatever it is, like, was it positive? Was it negative? How did you see these? What is your relationship to these demands when it comes to your relationship with school, if any of them resonated with you? And just overall, school and you, we want to hear lived experiences if you're comfortable sharing. And obviously we can have some think time since that's a little bit deep.
I see a raised hand from Teresa, so I'll allow Teresa to come off mute.
All right, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So one relationship that I had with school, one of my children was diagnosed with severe PTSD from domestic violence. And our experience with the school system was that they failed to understand, as a mixed student, he's half Black, half white, but, you know, he was labeled Black. His behavior in the classroom was always labeled as something, as a behavior that was not something agreeable to the norm of how education should be. So they put him in IEPs and special classes that, even though he was smart, they still put him in separate classes. And so when you look at that, eventually my son dropped out of school, and so I had to homeschool him. But the result of that is that they didn't know how to really work with him in his mental health issues. And which is not just one. I met other parents in I'm in the Sammamish or Issaquah school district, and they really have a lack of BIPOC here. I mean, it's bad. And over again, the teacher's reaction, because you're not culturally responsive, is to just suspend them. So I had a child who was suspended more days than he even attended. So, and this is good that you're talking about this, and as youth are recognizing it, and I work with the ISD to try and bring in equity partnership with the community and with the school, and it's just an overwhelming amount of disproportionate disparity regarding people of color and or brown. So it's not just African American. I have Indian friends who are, their children are being marginalized, children who are queer and happen to be people of brown or other color, other race. So yeah, the relationship with the school and the police officers and their relationship with students, they're always good with the white kids that are wealthy up here. But anybody that makes a mistake that is a minority, then they automatically like to put them in headlocks and and some kind of, position, which is absolutely debilitating and traumatizing to a child, especially if they've already been diagnosed. So my relationship with schools, not been the greatest, especially in areas where it's predominantly white and there are no representations of anybody of any color, and not even a lot of students in the schools are people of color. So it's, yeah, I can say that I have had that with my son, and it's been a horrible experience.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I will read what someone had just put in the chat if other people want to continue raising their hand or put them in the chat as well. As a parent, I worked on STPP, school to prison pipeline issues, having a daughter with autism and an IEP and having to deal with suspension instead of meeting her needs. Ended up organizing parents and families to address school to prison pipeline issues. Now a school board member working on equity as my focus. Thank you for sharing that. That's really amazing. Does anyone else have an answer to, or anyone else want to share for the second question before we move on? Okay.
And, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go.
I was just gonna say, and it is okay if you do not feel like sharing. This is a safe place, and we just wanted to open up that question to everyone, just because when we speak to you, we don't want it to just be here and like you listen to us and we talk for a little bit. Like, we want you to listen to our demands, listen to what we're fighting for, and also take that away and want to take action and probably work together maybe one day. But so just even thinking about what is your relationship with school, even after this, being in this meeting together, talking about that with yourself, with others, just so you can think about how school may have gotten me to the position I am now, and that's what made me me, even if that's positive or negative or whatever.
Someone just shared in the chat, those of us that care about equity issues need to occupy school boards, hold that power, which is 100% right. And I think a lot of times when we talk about equity and doing anti-racism work, it becomes a little bit stunted because people don't think that they have power. People don't think that they're in the right positionality, whether they're only a paraeducator or they're not in the classroom or not on the school board, or just don't have any resources or whatever you think you need to organize. But honestly, everyone has power, and even though the systems that we inhabit in schools try to dim that power or suppress it, I feel like it does take a little bit of digging to find community and organizing abilities, because numbers are power. There's powers in numbers, power in numbers. But just doing whatever you can, no matter how big or small, is enough. And I saw a quote yesterday, I think it was like from John or something. It was on John's Instagram page, but it was like, we don't need people who are perfect. We need people who are courageous. And I think that that sums it up 100%. We don't need, you know, every teacher to teach ethnic studies exactly the way that it's supposed to be taught. And, you know, we need to be perfect. You know, everyone's going to make mistakes, but we need people who are courageous, who are a little bit radical, who are whatever you want to call it, because we can't really get anywhere else without that. And so I really appreciate the people who've already kind of mentioned the school to prison pipeline, which, as you can see, is our third question. What is your familiarity with the school to prison pipeline? Now, whatever it is, we would love to hear and you know, kind of have a deeper conversation about that, obviously, because we're at the Access to Justice conference, justice system. Those intersections between the school system and legal system are why we're here.
I see Anna's hand, so here you go, Anna.
I just have a personal kind of story to share about that school to prison pipeline. I'm now 45 years old, but when I was in high school, there was an adoption of a policy that now as an adult, I know adversely affected the Black and brown students in the school. But it was a zero tolerance policy. And if you were got in trouble for fighting, you were expelled. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. And on top of being expelled, I got arrested. And all of the opportunity was just stripped away because of the lack of, you know, support. Even we're talking so long ago. And to, as an adult and seeing it in the local schools, they don't have the zero tolerance not everybody has the zero tolerance policies, but their policies are doing the same thing. They're still designed, they may have changed, but they're still designed to do the same thing. And I'm looking forward to learning more about helping dismantle that. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you so much for sharing. Would anyone else like to either put in the chat or verbally, or raise your hand so you can verbally share?
Laura Bradley.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the panelists for speaking with us about your demands. I really admire the work you're doing. So I'm aware that when students aren't successful in school, and particularly when they end up dropping out, a number of things occur. Many of them turn to a gang lifestyle, or they sometimes for a sense of inclusion, sometimes to make money to help support their families for a number of other reasons. But school is an essential resource to really any kind of job. Almost any job wants you to have graduated from high school. And so these policies that push young people out of school really are pushing them towards prison, whether they realize it or not. And I'm very much an advocate of, we need to stop the trauma, and where we can't stop it, we need to treat it so that everyone has a shot at what can be a happy and fulfilling life.
Janet? Janice, I see your hand is up and you should be able to come off mute. I'm not sure if Janice is able to come off of mute. Oh, try it again here. Are you there, Janice? All right, we might not be able to get Janice's question.
Okay, maybe you can try putting it in the chat. And I also want to say thank you to the person who shared before. We really appreciate that. I think I really appreciate what you said about school is an essential resource, and that's true. School is an essential resource, but as we're gonna, talk about, school is an essential resource that the schools don't really want to give to a lot of their students. And when we talk about students being pushed out, it's because of, zero tolerance policies, like someone had shared before. There's a zero tolerance policy, they get in a fight, they get kicked out, they join a gang, or they get into trouble, they do something because they were pushed out of this essential resource, and that leads to incarceration. And then there's a whole other system of inequities in the incarceration, in it being incarcerated, that continue itself, and it's all cyclical. And again, nothing is in a vacuum. We talked about counselors and police officers in schools, and when people have mental illnesses, or when people have things that they're struggling with but no counselors to go to, and then there's cops who are policing them in schools, and then they get in a fight, and then they get kicked out, and it's all cyclical and connected. And so I'm going to pass to someone else because I feel like I've been talking a lot, but I really appreciate these connections and lived experiences that you all are sharing. Yeah.
I'm going to add on to what you're saying, Alexis, because it's so beautifully said, as always. This is why it's so important to have restorative justice practices in school, because instead of pushing these students out and sending them to these awful places where they're just getting traumatized and let out into the world, knowing not enough to survive, we can do restorative justice to teach them this is what you do in response instead of acting out in this way. And not just saying this is what you do in response, but also figuring out the deeper meaning behind the issue and figuring it out one-on-one with someone who's educated and can teach someone else. So it's like Alexis said, it's like the circle of life kind of, but instead of that circle of just that toxicity of the environment we're living in, we're changing that circle and making it into something positive. So that's why restorative justice is so important to be implemented K through 12 and have people who are educated on restorative justice and the practices used with it to help benefit students and teachers to make our relationships stronger so we can then be able to work together. And then I would love to keep hearing responses from others.
All right, Teresa has raised her hand. Go ahead, Teresa.
Hi, hello again. Again, young ladies, you guys, I'm impressed. I'm so impressed the work that you guys are doing and making changes in the school system that has been much needed. I mean, and in response to the familiarity with the school prison and restorative, change. I mean, if the school really, especially Washington State, if they really want to show that they're listening and are really wanting to make changes, this shouldn't be such a difficult demand, just to be quite honest. History shouldn't be such a difficult thing to teach because history will tell the truth about all accounts. It's not always a one-sided story that we've been going by his story. I mean, I always break it down like that. But when we talk about restorative justice, this shouldn't be such a difficult concept either, considering the history and the proof that shows the history of the treatment of people of color or anybody who's BIPOC or disabilities or anything like that. So I'm glad that you guys are doing this. And it's just so frustrating to me that we even have to keep having a discussion and we have to keep, fighting for this when it's obvious that we have the proof and the data that shows that it needs to change. And when you have a system that is predominantly 90% white Americans, and they don't do anything to make sure it's a mandate to teach cultural responsiveness to children in your classroom, you don't make it. It's not about saying, I am woke. You got to be learned. And there's a difference between being a woke person with a particular, with a movement like this, and then someone who's going to be learned. And I think that people need to be learned. And when you're learned, that means you've taken that, you've applied it to yourself, you apply it to your family, and then you're able to regurgitate that information and take it and transform it and speak it to other people around your circle. That's what a learned person does. They can reteach it, re-educate. And what I'm noticing are many of the teachers don't really care. Some of them just do not care because they only do what's necessary at the school. And I just came from some other conferences today about how you have to apply that in your daily life. And if it's not even applicable in your daily life, what makes you think that teacher's going to apply it in the school system or towards people of color? So it's a real concern because education has a right to be given to all students. No one should be kicked out of a school. There shouldn't be this large amount of, we're going to take you out of school. And although I know a person who worked with the laws about making you can no longer do more than 10 days, but you find other people to find a way around it because they don't want to work with you. And again, historically, all it shows is that you found a different way to continue to oppress people of color by making your little written policies to do this, to do that. And what it does, it really affects the community as a whole. And every child has a right for free education. I do IEP. Everyone should have that right. So why would we think that it's okay to expel a student when they have a right to that education? And that's all I have to say, because restorative justice, all of this needs to be done. But I really believe that if the school districts really believed that they want to make change, we would not have to be sitting here still making these discussions and these talks because they don't want to make change. So guess what? You're going to have to force it and make them look embarrassed about why their inability to really make change. Why are you not agreeing to it? Why is this taking so long? When you know the history of this country and what it has done, why it was created, the school, the prison, the pipeline, we all know the theory has been proven, the data's there. So there's nothing else we should be having to discuss with. You guys should not have to be doing this. We should be making sure it's done. The school system should be making sure it's done. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's also adding on to what you just said, which was so powerful. It's really important to remember that we've been waiting for changes for so long. I mean, I'm only like 17 and I say that, which is crazy that I have to say that, but we've been waiting for changes for so long. At this point, it should just be like, we come to the school board, we come to the school districts with changes we want to see, because if they're not going to do the work, we're going to come at them with ideas we have to make that change.
Right.
And I think you really hit the nail on the head, especially in Washington, where like, if people wanted the change that they say that they do, it would have been done. So especially in Washington, like we always talk about this, the passive aggressive Pacific Northwest, they'll be in the meetings, nodding their head, agree, yes. But then when it comes to, making change, writing policies, voting for things, decline things, whatever it is, there's no change because these people, they don't actually want to advance everyone. They don't actually want the change. They don't actually want to make things more equitable because they're benefiting where they're sitting and they don't want to give up that power. And I think that it's really telling when we have to, beg and scream and plead and all this stuff for the smallest of changes, the smallest of, anythings. And you said something else that was really powerful, that I wanted to say something about, but I forgot. And I made a pact to myself that I wouldn't ramble when I don't know what I'm saying. So I will let either Maddie or Hibbah share some of the things that have been put in the chat.
Okay, I can start with what Janice said. So she said the ability to have the teachers represent the diverse student body, the ability to meet the students where they are as learners, and the ability to have additional resources of counselors are so important to make a change in the school to prison pipeline. And that is so important because we need to have counselors to who can help the students in order to get rid of the school to prison pipeline and to have those resources. And then she also said educating the educators is a must. They need to be able to have smaller classrooms, be able to differentiate the material so that all learners stay engaged.
And I will die on this hill, but someone asked me once what makes a good educator, and the best educators are the ones who are learners first. The best educators are the ones who have no egos, have no hierarchies in their classrooms, who know that they're there to learn just as much as the students are. And once we adapt that growth mindset, which, growth mindset, but once we adapt that mindset of like, no one knows everything, no one knows exactly how it's supposed to be done, no one knows that this is, the status quo that we need to stay up with, like, that's not a thing. We all need to be open-minded. We all need to be looking for ways that we could be wrong and that we could improve, because if not, we're doing a disservice to everyone. Yeah, that's what I was going to say earlier. Does anyone else have anything that they want to share? It can be related to school to prison pipeline, anything that we've talked about, any questions as well. I think we can start moving into that. Any questions for us, for the group? Would really love to hear from everyone, anyone who would like to share or ask something. And I'm also curious, I'll pose a question to you all, like, what are your guys' positions just in life? Like, what do you hear today? What position are you here today in? And like, what were you hoping to get from this panel and from this conference overall? Just wanting to learn a little bit more about.
I see Nikki's hand, so go ahead, Nikki.
Hi, yeah, just I saw you all when you came to Spokane, that photo I remember, and I really liked listening to you then. I think it's important to listen to the voices of students, and so I was really glad to see that you all were speaking at this conference, and I appreciate all the demands that you are working on. I'm working on the same things in Spokane. We have a majority BIPOC school board. We're doing it. We're getting it done. There's always going to be issues, individual issues, but systemically we are making change. Like we got rid of policing students. We got rid of it. So we're changing our curriculum. So you are our future, and it's very inspiring to listen to you. So thank you for presenting today and giving us all the chance to hear you. I don't know how to unmute or how to mute again.
Thank you so much for sharing, and we really appreciate that connection from Spokane. I know that was a little while ago, so that's really great. I just wanted to answer this quick question in the Q&A box. Do you have students in other school districts that belong to NAACP Youth Council? I'm in Thurston County and interested in learning if there is a local chapter here. We do have people from other districts in our group. I'm from the Tacloa School District. I know Hibbah's from Edmonds, I believe. Sorry if I messed that up. We have people from Redmond, Renton. Yeah, so other places where we're founded, and we have a lot of people from Seattle, but we are slowly but surely expanding. I think I know someone in Thurston County, but I don't remember who. But as far as like a local chapter, I don't know, John, maybe you can answer more for that. Anyway, continue on with questions. I think we can go to the next slide, which would be our Q&A section.
Also, to add on to that one question Alexis was answering, so we are the the Alaska, Oregon, and Washington branch. So maybe I'm just not good with locations, but their county is in Washington. So if you are interested in joining, please reach out to John and we can have an orientation maybe and get to know each other, and we can see where it goes from there.
Absolutely. And like John said at the beginning, he's the point person for all contacts. So his email is at the top, and I'm sure he'll share it again. And we have another slide with contact information. Some things that are being put in the chat: having successfully been involved in the resignation of the Seattle Public Schools superintendent, how will you be involved in the selection of a new superintendent, including what should Seattle look for in the new superintendent, and how will you be involved? That's a great question. Brent Jones, is he an interim superintendent? So, Mia, since you're in Seattle.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, so Brent Jones is the interim superintendent for a limited amount of time. He will not be allowed to run for like the actual superintendent when that happens. And we haven't been given too much information yet, just because I think it was a little messy with COVID, and like we're going back to in-person school this coming year. But I know that we are constantly in contact with the school board now, due to like actually that policy we worked on. We actually have a lot better relationship with the school board now. So we are like in contact, and if we would like to, we can set up meetings with Brent Jones and the school board on talking about how we can be a part of the selection process for the incoming superintendent.
Maddie or Hibbah, do you want to answer this last question about how to start an equity group in other communities?
Okay, so I think to start like a group, like for schools and the communities, you have to have people, like you have to have students who are like interested and who are willing to put in the work, because it is a lot of work to go out and talk to people and all that. And it's also really helpful to have connections with people at your school. So if reaching out to your students, teachers and stuff who you know would help you, and who you think would be willing to like make a change. And I guess having support, like finding people that you think would support, and being willing to put in the work is one of the most important things.
I would just like to add on to that, and also something that someone else had put earlier in the chat. It's a little bit like abstract, but I would say, like, with everything that we've talked about, the thing that it boils down for me is humanity. Finding the humanity in students, that's how you build connections. Finding the humanity in teachers, that's how you build connections. Finding the humanity in, any space that you occupy is what you need to make sure that you're trying to progress it into whatever you want to progress it into. But when we, kind of forget that students and teachers and staff alike are actual people with feelings and flaws and whatever it is, that's how we get into positions that we're in. That's how we, forget to just remember that there's other things that are more important than test scores. There are more important things than, whatever it is. And so I think when you're looking to start a group for equity or whatever it would be, and I think the main thing I would take out of this is like making sure that you are starting from like just the purest of places, just wanting to do good, wanting to make positive change or whatever it would be, and finding people who align, obviously, and just seeing the humanity in people and building connections or community members, networking, whatever it may be, staying in contact with people who are about your cause. And the NAACP Youth Council, great place to start. You're already here, like just doing things that will do, just doing whatever you can, no matter how big or small, and remembering why you're there.
Yeah, adding on to what was already said, making sure you're asking yourself before you reach out to others, like, what is my goal? What is my mission? And what do I want to do? And how can I do it? So continuing to ask yourself that, that's kind of why we as a group, we have our demands, because we kind of have like a direction to follow. Because we have like, there's even demands, there's even like things and conversations we have in NYC that demands yet, that we talk about and changes we want to see. So it's like exploring what changes you want to see in your community and beyond and in your district. And to find groups of people who want to do that too. I love the quote that was put in the chat. That was, where is it? It says, one of my favorite quotes from a movie is, if you stare at a person long enough, you begin to see their humanity. I really like that quote. I want to know where it's from, but just finding people with the same, not the same beliefs, but the same, like, they have a mission, they know how to execute it, and they want to do it with you. And yes, it takes time and dedication, but the goal will get there. It might not get there in our time, but our kids and our grandparents, I keep saying grandparents today when I mean grandchildren. I don't know why. But just finding people who can do that too, and who have that vision and want to get stuff done. It's not hard to find them at all. They're probably your neighbors. So just look, and you can see them. And then there was another question in the chat that was, can you talk about what restorative justice looks like in a high school campus? I don't know if you guys' school has restorative justice for the other youth members on board. I don't think they do. I think it's just Cleveland, which is really unfortunate. That's why we want to get it implemented. But for my school, we have 2 restorative justice leaders, and they are paid through SBS. And their job is to lead conflicts that happen between students, teachers, parents, etc. And I can talk about a little bit. I can talk a little bit about my experience with restorative justice. They are confidential, but there are certain aspects that you can share. For example, I've only had mine with teachers who were pretty much racist. So I had to, what you do is you fill out a form if you would like to have a circle, and then you do not have to actually be in the circle or have one at all, but it's highly requested to repair the issue that was happened. And you have the conversation separately with one of the leaders or the coordinators of the circle, and then you talk about what your perspective was and what you thought about it, and talk about the situation, and then you come together as a group and try to find, I guess you would say, a happy medium and a level of respect that was lost, because respect was lost throughout whatever happened. And that's what you pretty much do. And you try to find a way to, like, it's called restorative justice, you restore that issue. So for example, my teacher put us into like groups that were segregated, like there were the Black students in the back, and then other BIPOC students, and then there were white students sitting in the front in the classroom. And like, she took away our rights in this like game. I'm not going to get into detail too much more. And I thought that was very like weird. As a freshman, I was like, this doesn't feel right. So I went to the restorative justice circle leaders, because it's it just talked about a lot of restorative justice. And we were able to find an understanding, and pretty much that teacher is not working at the school anymore. But regardless, restorative justice is so important, just because you learn how to repair the issue and everything else in between, and you learn and grow, and you learn how to approach conversations in ways that not a lot of adults can do. And learning that at such a young age is so important. I was talking a lot, so let's get back to the Q&A. But yeah, that's a little bit of what restorative justice looks like in high school. It probably will look different in middle and elementary schools, just due to the age.
Yeah, and speaking of middle school, in my middle school, we had a program called peer mediators, or peer mediation, which is a form of restorative justice. And it was very quickly basically where if there was conflict between students, most of the conflicts were between students, but anyone, they would request to go into a peer mediation, and then it would be peers, like other students who would be leading the mediations, and they were trained. I was one of them. We were trained for like however many hours. We did, mock mediations. We did mediations with like other mentors or adults who were actually mediators, and we practiced that first. And it was really successful because it was, an option that, or it allowed an option for our assistant principal who dealt with discipline issues that she didn't have before. And she realized like a switch of like just the energy around, going to the principal's office or having a conflict overall. And so even though that was in middle school, I feel like it would be easily applicable to high school as well, because it moved on to high school. I'm still a peer mediator in high school. So that's just also another form of mediation. And it is really powerful when it's done peer to peer, which I think is very prevalent in my school. John just put the link to our demands in the chat if you would like those. A little bit further up is a link to a survey that we asked that you fill out. It's really quick. It's just getting your feedback, and allows for our grant funding to have supplementation to possibly continue. Something in the chat, my son's elementary has a CRC conflict resolution committee that held a cross section of the parent and teacher body. It took no additional funding. It was very effective. Yeah, and I want to talk about that a little bit more. Funding is that when Mia had mentioned when she was talking about how restorative justice works in her school, she said that there's 2 restorative justice staff members who are paid. And I feel like there's this misconception about a lot of things in schools when we try to do new things or initiatives or whatever. A lot of people say that you can't do anything without funding. A lot of people say you can, and there's obviously different scenarios. But when I in the chat was saying stuff about funding, a lot of times administrators will say, yeah, we really care about having someone who works with race and equity on our team. We really care about having someone to do this work. But they are asking these people to do a lot of labor. They're asking these people to do like everything under the sun that isn't their job description and not paying them at all. That isn't caring about doing DEI or race and equity work. That isn't caring about actually making changes if you're not going to put your money where your mouth is. But it also kind of goes another way where they'll say like, no, we can't actually implement XYZ because we don't have the funding. But then they'll come, or whoever it is will come to those administrators saying, no, here's how we do it. And it's still like either or they use funding as an excuse, or they don't pay the people who are doing the work. And so I feel like that's budgets are moral documents. Yeah. John, someone said that they're not able to access the link. Anyhow, but yeah, that's just my tangent about it, is that the funding conversation is tired.
Yeah, adding on to Alexis, I totally agree. I feel like when it comes to funding, something that I always like to say is like, where is it? And I mean that as some schools have so much money, even just from the PTA. I'm not gonna call out schools, but they just have so much money that's just sitting there, and then other schools are so underfunded when they need all this support. I forgot what I was gonna say because I got lost in Alexis's words, because I was like, yeah, yes. But yeah, when it comes to money and funding, when it comes to schools, I think that's a whole nother like conference that needs to happen, because there's so much more involvement that the students and the educators need to be involved in when it comes to like what's happening with our education, what's happening with who's teaching the teachers what to say and what not to say, and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate to do, and just all the other like stuff is what I'll call it. It's just there's so much more and so much more conversations we need to have about it. So I totally agree with what Alexis is saying, that it's so much deeper than what we even think it is.
So with that being said, in our final 3 minutes, does anyone else have anything to share, any last regards? And can we go to the next slide with the contact information? Teresa in the chat said the budget they have to pay police should be the budget for these types of programs, which is definitely true. I know it's like different in some places, like my school, our district doesn't pay for SROs. It comes from the city, but the city and the school are like a whole other mess. But definitely agree. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you. The person who just put that in chat.
So as we're wrapping up this, we just want to make sure that you see our last slide with information about how to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, email, John's email, and Twitter, just so we can all stay in contact and we can get the word out, because it seems like we all pretty much have the same goal and same missions. So let's like get to where we want to go. And then what John kind of said in the chat too, if we could go to the next slide for one quick second and just making sure that we're filling our evaluation, just because it's so incredibly important for the youth to get the grant, that money that we get paid, or the service hours, so they can get stuff back from all the hard work we do, because it is a lot. So making sure that you're filling out the evaluation in the chat. And then we can go back to the last slide again.
Okay, it is just about that time, 3:30. So we appreciate you all being here, joining us, engaging, and thank you so much. And don't forget